hello, it is us from the past talking to you in the future. But besides the fact, I imagine my future self listening to this got some really good gifts for Christmas, which is my question to you. What are some of your favorite gifts and how do you approach gift giving?
Okay, those are 2 questions. Let's start with favorite gifts. My sisters, like my older sister, is a really good gift giver. And so one thing I turned 30 a couple weeks ago, and my sister got all of my one niece and my 7 nephews to take pictures holding like birthday signs for me, and then sent me a photo album with all of them that are like, happy birthday, Aunt Mag. And then like a recipe book that looks like the one that we grew up with in childhood. So I thought that was really great. Maybe not the best one of my whole life, but it's top of mind, and it was like really, really sweet.
So something that was thoughtful and sentimental has a lot of value to you.
Yeah. And it's like a Rifle Paper Co. recipe book. So it's like you add pages, and I like to like paint in recipes and like as I like come to like edit them and stuff. And so it's fun. It's very sentimental, but yes. Yeah. So I don't know. That was a good recent gift. What about you?
I think one of the best recent gifts I got was
friendship.
Yes, outside of your friendship, which was gift wrapped for my birthday.
Maybe the podcast.
I got like a litter box concealer, or like a litter box in housement. So you know how like litter boxes are ugly and they smell. So you can get these like almost like aesthetic little houses to put the box in, so it kind of fits in with the vibe of your furniture. And
what is your vibe for your litter box?
It's like boho raton.
It's farmhouse chic.
No, it's not farmhouse. We detest farmhouse.
You're kind of farmhouse chic. Just kidding, you're not. You're like mid-century modern.
Yeah, I'm mid-century modern, boho, a little bit of organic modern. Anyways, I like the person who got me the gift. It was my ex-girlfriend, my girlfriend at the time. She was like, I know that you just get like frustrated if something doesn't fit your aesthetic or your vibe. So she's like, I'm just going to find something and like relieve that. And so it was really thoughtful because I didn't even like know that was an option for litter boxes. I was just like, I'm cursed. I'm like stuck with this ugly thing. And she was like, surprised. Now it just looks like a box in the corner. There could be anything in there. Like maybe it's a bunch of roses, but it's just cat poop. But you don't know by looking at it.
How are the cats doing at sharing that space?
Oh, pretty well.
I don't know if that's like something. I don't have cats. I'm allergic to cats, so I like don't know about their life cycles.
Yeah. Well, since I now know how to approach it, I got a couple more aesthetic hidden litter boxes, and they're scattered.
How many litter boxes do you have in your?
I have 2.
You're like, I actually have 12.
So these losers, you're supposed to have 1 more litter box than the amount of cats you have.
Oh,
so
really?
I should have 3, but we're functioning okay with 2.
I'm gonna report you to the Sarah McLachlan or whatever.
National Cat Association.
I'm playing that right now.
I'm outing myself. No, I swear they're happy. They're look at them. They're sleeping on my chair right now, being calm. Cute little. Yeah, they're friends. It's because of the ample amount of litter boxes they have.
Can we ask the question of what is the worst gift you've ever gotten? I don't know. Is that rude? Yeah. Is that rude, chat? The person who got mine knows it, and it's because it's my mom. Shout out to my mom. Love you.
Okay.
But it was a bad gift.
I want to hear it.
So I was 8. This is a trauma. Is it a trauma? I'm kidding. It's not a trauma. But I was 8, and 8-year-old girls. I had normal 8-year-old girl, normative 8-year-old girl interests. Like I liked coloring. I liked going to Limited Too. I liked Disney. Like da 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 da. My mom got me a game, and I open it. I go, "What is this?" And it looks like a sort of like primordial like Bop It. And it actually is not a game. It's just a multiplying and division sort of calculator thing that is supposed to look like a game, but is really just a long division and multiplication.
So it's like an abacus or something?
Yeah, but like kind of technological and bright colors. And I looked up at her, and I was 8 years old, and I just looked at my mom and goes, why would you get this for me?
You're using your therapeutic language. You're like, I just want to understand your thought process.
Yeah, can you put me in your mind? Like, what's your frame of mind for an 8-year-old right now?
What was going through your mind when you got me this like medieval abacus?
Well, that would have been cooler if it was an abacus. It was literally like you like twisted it and had to like hit things when you got the right number. and try and like finish the most. And I was good at math. So it wasn't like a you need to improve, Maggie. It was like, she likes that. She likes those little yellow plastic things where you like would have a string. Did you ever do this? Did you do this in school?
No, I don't know what you're
There'd be
talking
like
about.
numbers and you'd get like a little piece of plastic and have like a red string. Editors, can we put a picture of one of these up here if you know what I'm talking about? And you would like be timed and you'd have to like wrap the string around it and match like the number times something and you would get
What
to the
is
end of
this?
it. Okay, maybe I
We
did
used
deserve
flashcards.
maybe I
Yeah.
deserve the calculator bop it for the amount
And
that
I
that
did
popped
not
me.
get flashcards. I would say I'm gonna make fun of my sister on this, and this isn't a gift I got, but it's a gift my mom got. I think it was the worst gift probably that's ever been given in our family, but it was really funny. So, my mom was paralyzed in an accident in high school. She was hit while cycling, so she's paralyzed from the waist down. We're about 3 years out of the accident, so like we've adjusted to life around the household with her being paraplegic, and she was always a doer. Like she was biking and doing these active things. So Heidi, my older sister, goes, I want to give that back to her. And she's like, I want to give her the gift of freedom. And that was interpreted by a wetsuit, which was like skin tight and like Arctic qualified. And she was like, see, now you can go swimming in the lake with this wetsuit. And my mom can't, she doesn't have any control, volitional control over legs. So trying to put a paraplegic leg in a wetsuit is like trying to play pool with a rope. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
God.
so my mom opens the gift and she sees the wetsuit and she just starts laughing. she like doesn't even finish. She just starts laughing. We're like, Mom, what's in the gift? What's in the gift? And Heidi's like, it's freedom, Mom. I got you freedom. And then Mom starts laughing. And then my little sister and I go to open up the wetsuit. And Heidi starts getting mad. And she leaves and starts going crying.
She's like, F you guys.
In what world did you think I was going to use this wetsuit?
How old was your sister at that time?
She was like, oh gosh, she was like 19 or 20. So Heidi is so, I think quixotic is the word I use. She is so optimistic, and we call it like idealism is the word I came up with. Yeah, she's being like idealistic. And so she takes her licks with this because the thing is like Heidi's super idealistic and she's real optimistic. And sometimes she crashes and burns like this, but then sometimes she pulls off like the impossible. Like she's a crit care doctor and she created a new residency spot for her, or a new fellowship spot for herself because she was like, I want to do this. and then was like super optimistic, and everyone was like, Heidi, I don't know if that's going to work out. And then all of a sudden, like out of the ether, she creates a job for herself. So shout out to Heidi.
Shout out
Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't.
Can we put the eagle sound in here for Heidi?
Yeah. So now that we're done with gift giving, I want to kind of move into what we're actually talking about today, which is,
now that we've delighted you with our mirth and our childlike whimsy.
Time for the misery part.
It's time for balance.
So my birthday is the second week of January, which is something I have to look forward to, but these next 2 weeks are dreaded. I just remember I come back from school and the days are dark. You're kind of dreading because the break is over and you're dealing with another semester. And it's like you go to school in the dark and you come back in the dark. And it's just such a slog.
I feel like the worst January, February. I don't know if it was the worst, but the reason I have TikTok is because of intern year, January, February in Boston. It was like I was on my medicine half of the year for psych and would get to the hospital at 6:30 or 6:15. And wouldn't leave till 6:30 or 7 and just didn't see the sun. Just me and the moon were really vibing those 2 months. And the depression made me start writing on TikTok as like, here's something for me to do.
Yeah, it's like the sun is like your roommate that you never see because you guys work different jobs. You're like, bro.
She's a flighty minx during this time of the year.
And so it turns out that there's a very specific disorder that happens.
Yes.
Based on these time movements, which is what the episode is about today. That's seasonal affective disorder.
Or SAD.
Yeah. Familiarly, seasonal depression.
Winter blues.
So Yeah, I guess winter blues could be a subset of it. So, Margaret, I understand that you, being inclined with stregonona fall and all the things that we do to ward
Yes.
off the seasonal affective disorder, I was curious what you dug up as far as
Yes.
the social and political context
Yeah.
of my winter blues.
Yes. So I think we'll divide this two ways. I'll say a couple sentences on what we define it as psychiatrists in the DSM-5. And then bigger than that, because I think people are actually pretty familiar with, a lot of people are familiar with what seasonal depression is, but talk about what we see online in kind of the last 5 or 10 years and just like the pop culture / like pop health experience of this and how people interact with it. So in the DSM-5 or the what is it? The manual
Diagnostic and statistical manual.
statistical manual. What does the statistical stand for in that? Like it's just we use
there are
statistics
statistics in it.
There are statistics.
If you thumb through it, there are statistics. Yeah.
There are statistics. That's true. That's so true. But we don't put that in every book. Like anyway,
Yeah, I don't know why I got its spot.
But in the DSM-5, it is a subset of like major depressive disorders or depressive disorders in general. So
DSM
a lot of this
5 text revised
yeah,
TR.
Yeah.
Thank you.
TR. I think it might be in the ICD-10 as its own separate thing, but I did not review enough to know that. And I don't use the ICD-10 or 11.
DSM.
Yeah, we American Eagle sound again. We stick with DSM-5.
Get out of here, SNOMED.
But so a lot of the ways we describe it are because of this very similar to the ways that we describe depression in other settings. So as we've said before in the podcast, and as all psychiatrists say when they memorize this, or med students, the SIGI caps of it all, which is sadness, loss of interest or anhedonia, guilt, decrease in energy and like fatigue, and then concentration, appetite, psychomotor slowing, and sleep, I want to say, and then suicidality is its own thing outside of this. But so basically it's a kind of depression that we think about impacted by the seasons of the year. And so we classically think of it as during the months like starting in October through March. So when it gets colder, the days get shorter and there's less exposure to the sun, as well as harsher weather. Although I'm curious, Preston, what you'll have to say about the weather versus the sun exposure in terms of the etiology. But that it can happen in the summer as well. So it's classically during like winter, shorter light months. But I think there's an expanding definition of seasonal affective as being able to be basically impact from seasonal changes in the amount of light exposure, not just in a reduction, but also for some people in the summer or spring. And so that's kind of a general clinical view of it. Kind of for shorthand, we'll think of it as like depression that happens mainly in the winter, though can happen at other times with
and
short
it's important to remember
exposure.
that like everything in psychiatry, these are basically syndromes that we see. So these are just symptoms that travel in space together. Mm-hmm. And we observe that these symptoms travel in space along with some other phenomenon. And we know that they're linked somehow. So just like we know chronologically that it's can reliably start at a certain change of seasons and will also be relieved by that certain change of seasons. And that's kind of all we've used to guide this naming organization, basically.
Right. The other thing the DSM says is it has to basically happen for more seasons than not. I don't know how you would measure that necessarily, but like it has to happen like sort of year over year in adulthood. Like we usually don't diagnose it if you because if you just have it during one winter, but don't have it other winters before, don't have it after, we would less categorize it as that. That might be a depressive episode, but it might not be seasonally mitigated.
Yeah.
So it says greater than 2 years.
If you have one dot in time, you can't draw a line between anything. You need two lines to draw a dot.
So true, Bestie.
Look at that. There's our line. So
now you could draw it.
Exactly.
Psychiatry loves making things in twos, like 2 years, 2 weeks, 2 months, especially when it comes to depression. So that's a general clinical overview. I guess one thing I want to say about that is the prevalence, according to the APA website, is 5% of adults in the U.S. may experience seasonal depression. And that time period is about 40% of the year on average, especially if it's like in this winter
Mhm.
timeline.
It's pretty
The other
profound.
clinical,
It's about
that's a
5%.
lot of people. Yeah. And
Or
if you think
sorry,
about
5%,
like,
that's about 1 in 20. So,
yeah, yeah. Which kind of maybe because I live in Boston, I'm like, that I feel like more people have it than
well, yeah,
I
because
feel
I'm
like
here
I'm
in
looking at
Texas where it's
50%.
it's not too often. So for every person in Texas that's not having seasonal
There's
depression,
5 angry
there's
people
6
at
in
Dunkin'
Boston.
Donuts in
yeah,
Massachusetts.
yeah, it's half the bus
That
where
sounds,
you guys
yeah.
are.
The other thing I was just going to say is that this might be a little bit in the weeds. If I think it's interesting to clinicians, maybe interesting to people who are not diagnosing, but thinking about exacerbations of mood disorders, or in this case, depression, versus something existing on its own. So we wouldn't necessarily call it. I think there are times you might say if someone has a like really mild depression the rest of the year, and then in the winter they have really, really severe depression, you still may call that part like mediated by like seasonal affective disorder.
Hmm.
But in general, we think about them in a not pure world where we didn't just know things by syndromes as almost separate. So you would almost say like their major depressive disorder worsens in the winter. But again, there's some intermix between that. The thing it reminds me of is like when we talk about like PMDD versus like a PME, which is a premenstrual exacerbation. So winter can worsen people's depression who have depression all the time. And PMDD and PME, it's like premenstrual or menstrual symptoms can worsen any mental health condition during that time because it's physiologically stressful. So I just say that to say that there's kind of this difference in the sort of ideal diagnostic world. In reality, I don't know that that's super meaningful outside of like maybe you increase your dose of antidepressants before the winter or something.
Yeah, I run into the same
Yeah.
problem with like a superimposed adjustment disorder on an existing mood situation. Like someone is chronically depressed and they're on medication, but now their symptoms are
Right.
worsening because they're going through a divorce.
Right.
Well, do you treat this as just like a separate thing, or do you see it as this divorce is an exacerbation of their mood disorder, so therefore you should adjust medication? I think it's always been kind of hard for me to navigate those, and I end up almost like retreating from the DSM and just kind of saying like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what does my gut say? Because I feel like this is where our ability to
Clinical vibe
categorize
check
things
time.
starts to fail us a little bit. Yeah, no, it's really time
Yeah.
for the vibe check.
What are the vibes right now?
What do you want to do?
I'm
You're in charge now.
like, you're the doctor. Um, but so that's kind of clinically what we're talking about. I think it's been interesting the last 5 to 10 years, as Preston mentioned, struggling on a fall of it all. But last year and now this year again, I have written in this time period about getting ready for daylight savings time, just because what I have found both in real life here in New England and then in the Midwest where I grew up and trained for med school, there's real, but more honestly, anecdotally on TikTok from like the people who follow me is how much dread people have for winter. And just that the depression worsens, their mental health worsens, and sometimes not even like clinically, like that just there's a really big feeling of like this is going to be a really, really hard time of year. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, some of which are neurobiological that you'll talk about that impact everyone, even if they are quote unquote subclinical or don't have seasonal depression. So the things I've loved reading into has been obviously we will talk about like medications and SSRIs and Wellbutrin, as well as like therapy or sleep kind of behavioral stuff, but thinking about ways to help people control what they can control during cold weather when they're very much like away from the sun, away from social gatherings, maybe um, isolating and feeling kind of cooped up, because I think that can be a big part, and reducing exercise if there are people who exercise outdoors.
Hmm. Yeah, we all have this relationship with our environment, and that's
Hmm.
dynamic as the seasons change. So,
Hmm.
ironically, for me, I go out less in the summertime because it's so hot here. So
That
community
makes sense.
shrinks, you work out less, and spend more time around like artificial light. So
That makes sense.
anything that's gonna be to trigger like how you feel, almost I guess psychotherapeutically about
Hmm.
the environment that you're in is going to affect all of that. And some
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
frame it differently.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about a little bit more on ways maybe we frame different seasons or things. Um, but I wonder if you have any experience. I'm curious about like in Texas, being where you are. I know you haven't been there always, but like, do you see seasonal affective disorder, or like, does it look like it happens in the summer, or like, is it still with like, because the day's still shortened there,
Yeah.
right?
So the days
She says
do
in New
shorten, and
England.
actually we have the luxury here of it getting annoyingly cold in
Love
January and
that.
still being unbelievably hot in the summer. So in the summer, I don't know if I've classified this as seasonal affective disorder because a
Mhm.
lot of it presents more as like irritability and anger, but
Mhm.
there is an established connection between increased temperature and irritability.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's actually like, I'll see a lot more like anxiety and frustration around like the heat because it's been 2 weeks where the temperature hasn't dipped below 100 degrees. Like you go out at 11 p.m. and it's 95 degrees.
Mhm.
And I'm just like,
I'm angry.
and so,
I don't want to
because I
celebrate
want to go
Honda
for
days
a
at a
run.
time
I'm
like
like, why
this.
is it so hot? Yeah. San
Well, the
Antonio is
paper,
like,
the review paper I read actually mentioned what you're saying too, of like that looking less like a melancholic neurovegetative depression as seasonal affective and more like an irritability, anxiety, depression, whatever.
yeah, it's like and it's funny because San Antonio actually is, I think we're number one in Texas for road rage incidents. And I wonder how, how we look at like latitude for seasonal affective disorder. I wonder if you could do the same
Yeah.
thing for like heat index of a city and their road rage.
Honestly, probably.
Yes. I think we'll know what we find if we investigate that.
NIMH. Call Preston. He's got some ideas.
Phineas, I know what we're gonna do today.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. So you feel like in winter there's less of a like patience with depression because the winter there is, I don't know. Sometimes I think of winter in like these like southern places where it's just like everything's concrete and there aren't leaves on. Do you keep your leaves? No. So it's just like ugly and weird and rainy and versus like here maybe it'll snow, and I feel like that's kind of like a vibe. To me that's kind of a vibe. I also feel like there's a big part of this of like where you were like raised for the first like, 18 years of your life and your tolerance or norming of like weather.
Mm-hmm.
So like
I
if
grew
you
up in
grow up
Colorado,
around
so
snow.
the idyllic snow
Yeah.
covered landscape really works for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas I feel like my friends from like California or who were raised like in the South are like, when it's like 55 degrees here, they're like, how are you not wearing a coat to me?
Mm-hmm.
So I
And
feel
then
like
you
that's
look
also
like
part of it.
that cool kid from high school who's like, I'm not even cold,
Yeah, I'm wearing
guys. I
flip
didn't even
flops and
notice.
basketball shorts.
Oh, it was cold out.
It's cool. I didn't know. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel it through my flip flops. So I think that I wonder what like your experience too is like. I guess in Texas it's different, but I think up here there is a lot of like real fear and anxiety going into the season. Like when daylight savings time happened, my like patients are worried about it in clinic,
Mm-hmm.
and they like tell me, even if they don't have like a pattern of it.
Yeah, I don't see too much of like that anticipatory anxiety about winter here. We have it
Mm-hmm.
we do have it for summer, and we have it for like our allergy season. So there
Interesting.
are like certain environmental cues that we get hyped up for or concerned about, but not. I haven't seen it the same in winter. Granted, this is only my second winter here.
That's fair. That's fair. So that's most of the clinical kind of stuff, thinking about diagnosing and thinking about it. Before we talk about treatments, I think we should take a break, and then you can talk to us a little bit about the neurobiology of this, because I think it's fascinating and also a little, I don't want to, it's not controversial, but it's like I don't know, I think there's unsolved, like everything in psychiatry, unsolved questions.
Yeah, so we have there's like a bunch of cool facts, fun biochemistry, and then a lot of unsatisfying conclusions that we can make from it.
Are we going to talk about vitamin D? Because
I didn't have any plans to talk about vitamin D, but we can.
I want to talk about, because a paper came out, not a paper came out over the summer from the Endocrine Society on being like, vitamin D question mark. I'll talk about it. It's a controversy sort of related
when we
to
come
this.
back, vitamin D and the rest of the
Mystery.
neurobiology. Okay.
All right, Preston, teach us about neurobiology.
You make me sound so smart when you say that, and I'm like intimidated. I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna have all the neurobiological facts that she's requesting. I just read a little bit of science.
I'm
So
going to do the like thing they do in political debates where it's like there's someone, or not even political debates, but when they do the thing on like, I don't remember what website it is, but they do like a lie detector and there's just a guy in the corner going like, I'm going to do this when you're talking.
Yeah. I don't know. Please interrupt. So I kind of wanted to start with how we think about wakefulness and our circadian rhythms as they pertain to light specifically, or just as they pertain to like our environment as that regulates it. So one thing that we talked about earlier was that there is something chronologically consistent about seasonal affective disorder. So when you think about like Humean causality, or the idea of like an antecedent event and a following event. Yeah. So like David Hume, that philosopher, he talks a lot about causality. And one of the ways of it.
Is it antecedent or is it antecedent?
And I say antecedent.
I think you can say both. Wrong my whole life.
Like ligand or ligand, you can say both, I think.
This is like epitome, and I was one of those people who said epitome for a long time. Continue.
Epitome's wrong, but the British will be like...
I know that. We all learned.
Aluminium. Yeah.
Canceled.
So...
Anyway...
So if something, the strength of causality is improved if we see two things are present together and then they're both absent at the same time.
Gotcha.
So that strengthens our correlation between them, which is what we see with seasonal affective disorder. So there is a certain period of time during a season where when that season comes on, the depressive symptoms return. When the season goes away, the depressive symptoms reliably go away. So there's a lot of the research around seasonal affective disorder is both distinguishing it from what we'll call non-seasonal depression for this episode, and also like how multiple things contribute to this like systemic thing. So the idea is like a trigger, something going on. So I'm going to use this word. It's called the Zeitgeber. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not. New word alert.
I took a little bit of German.
Eagle sound again.
So Zeitgeber, it means time giver. And all that is it's any sort of external or environmental stimulus that leads to time-related reactions in your body, or chronological reactions.
So is coffee one of those?
Caffeine sure could be a Zeitgeber. Really classic ones are light, like we talked about, could be temperature, could be exercise, could be eating. So, for example, they say like don't eat right before you go to bed because that's going to cause a cascade of different time-dependent actions that could wake you up more rather than helping you fall asleep. So, light as the Zeitgeber is the primary driver of wakefulness and circadian rhythms. It's pretty decently established. And it does it through a couple interesting mechanisms. So first, we're going to start out with melatonin, which you're familiar with. I imagine everybody loves melatonin.
Hell yeah.
So how do we get melatonin to release naturally?
That's a good question. I knew this at one point, I feel, but I don't think I can say reliably what it is. How do we get it to release? Like we stop looking at light? I don't know.
No, we look at light. That's it. So we have, I love the way our proteins interact with physics. So, rhodopsin is...
I did at one point.
Like the rods in our eyes, rhodopsin. Yeah. So that's a protein that it responds to a wavelength of light. And what it does is it just uses a single double bond. Do you remember like the cis and trans double bonds from chemistry? So it puts it in cis, which is high energy. And when a little bit of light hits it, it pops into trans. And when it does that, it tells you in the back of your head, hey, there's a color here. So you have rhodopsin is associated with like different levels of light and dark. So as the thing cycles and just the bonds just pop back and forth, it tells us, hey, I'm seeing light. Right next to rhodopsin is another protein called melanopsin, which does a similar thing. So, but instead of saying, hey, Preston, you're perceiving brightness, deep buried in these retinal ganglion cells, it just releases melatonin. So there's a specialized protein encasing, which has almost like a little apparatus that responds to the wavelength of light, causes an adjustment. It's a G-coupled protein receptor, and then it releases melatonin directly towards the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is this spot in our hypothalamus that regulates our circadian rhythms.
And so when we
So-
see a certain kind of light, it releases that.
Correct.
Then how does that? Is it
Oh.
like a specific wavelength of light that make? Because like that would make me think that if we saw light, then that would make us sleepy. But is it like the specific?
Sorry, I may be mixing this up. I think it inhibits the release of it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it does. I want to say it releases melatonin, or I think let's just say that I'm not going to say if it directly stimulates or inhibits the release of melatonin, but that this
Light modulates it.
this light interacting with melanopsin causes a
Mhm.
structural change that mediates the release of melatonin in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So that's
Okay.
what I'll say, but I don't know if like bright light leads to this or dark light leads to that directly. We just know what the output is. So
Okay.
that's what I would say is the best summary.
Okay.
And the reason that's relevant is because it helps us identify as the primary driver of circadian rhythm. So they took mice where they didn't knock out genes, so they just
Right.
removed this
Those neurons.
protein from those mice, and they had no ability to regulate their circadian rhythms when melanopsin was taken out. So we had a good understanding that like both light and melatonin are very important for circadian rhythms, and it's not necessarily run by a bunch of other neurotransmitters. However, alertness and wakefulness, they have a lot of roles to be played.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
as we know, dopamine is a very stimulating neurotransmitter, which has a huge role in wakefulness. It turns out our release of dopamine is kind of independent of melanopsin. So melanopsin kind of sits on this highway with melatonin, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. But dopamine is mediated more by just rods and cones responding to light. And dopamine is going to activate our reticular activating system and help us engage a lot more with like feeling alert and awake during the day.
Yeah.
So when light hits our brain, it's affecting multiple different proteins, and it's kind of going down different pathways to make us feel as though we've woken up.
Yeah.
So,
I think a complicated but consistent concept in neuroscience, including in this type of thing with like wakefulness or modulation of alertness, is that there are multiple places on the sort of circuit of function that we're talking about in terms of like a cognitive or whatever, like a brain body based function. And so there are many places where there can be inputs or kind of screw ups. So like you're talking about like this, if we don't have light through this kind of like the modulation of melatonin and that on wakefulness versus like dopaminergic modulation. I also think of like clinically, like why does delirium cause people to kind of sundown or to have waxing and waning alertness, which sometimes people will confuse as memory or tiredness, whatever. So I don't say all of that to just confuse it, but just to say that there's a lot of interacting parts in a circuit of if someone's awake, attending, or asleep, a low alertness that we're still figuring out. Would you agree with that?
Honestly, you kind of lost me. I'm not sure.
I know.
I'm not sure what you're getting at there.
I was just gonna say, there's multiple parts of the like kind of like circuit of things that make someone appear awake and alert or asleep. And
there are
not
many
able to
factors that
alert thinking.
contribute to our concept of like wakefulness, whereas it's easy for us to view it as just like an on and off switch. It's a bunch of bells and whistles and dials. And that's exactly what we see here too. So another thing, our third character today is going to be serotonin. And
Love her.
I don't
Miss
thoroughly
Tonin.
understand how Miss Tonin relates to wakefulness, but we do know like that it's released in sleep and modulated at the different layers of sleep, especially REM sleep. And so what we find in biopsies between patients that have like seasonal affective depression and non-seasonal depression is that there are differences in our serotonin receptors. So there is actually less serotonin reuptake transporters in the seasonal affective form of depression rather than non-seasonal depression.
Wait, so does that mean if there's less reuptake, that means in non-seasonal depression, there was more left in like the synapse?
So I think the only good conclusion we can make from
It's just that they're different.
is that there's less because it could be there's less serotonin in the synapse, which leads to less regulation of these reuptake transporters. So it's hard to like make a
There's something funky
concrete
about serotonin
conclusion.
modulation.
But we just so that's what I mean. It's unsatisfying.
Yeah.
We know that there's a different level of this protein, but we don't actually know what's happening in the synapse. But we do know that like there are characteristics of this disorder that are distinct from non-seasonal depression. The other thing that's been more robust is there's been a couple studies looking at levels of melatonin in patients who have seasonal depression versus non-seasonal depression. And it's a bit controversial, but pretty consistently they've been able to demonstrate that there's higher levels of melatonin during the day in patients with seasonal depression, which that does kind of make sense intuitively. Feeling more tired during the day and not being able to eliminate your melatonin to feel like more awake. Correct. So the reason why I bring up serotonin, dopamine, and light is because those all kind of track on the 3 ways that we try to treat seasonal depression. And so before we kind of go into these treatments, I want to talk about our hypothesis of like what even causes this as we get from kind of the mechanism of light causing us to feel awake, but why does it affect some people more consistently than others? So there is this latitude hypothesis for a while that really just observed that there's a linear correlation between your northern latitude and the rate of the incidence of seasonal affective disorder. So the paper I was looking at started in, they started in Nashua, they went down to New York, and then Montgomery, and then Sarasota. I don't know where Sarasota is, but it's at 27 degrees north.
Very far.
Oh, it's in Florida? Yeah.
Yeah.
In Nashua, it was 26% in the patient population that they studied, and it dropped down to 13% in Sarasota.
Yeah.
So there was almost a correlating, and then it goes linearly. So correlating with your latitude as you go down, it tracks consistently with the rates of seasonal affective disorder. So there's this thought that, hey, maybe people who are born in different latitudes just don't have like the genetic predisposition to handle this, and then their rates will decrease, or their rates will then increase. But what we found is that there's a couple holes in this theory. One is that people aren't restricted to their latitude. So some people move into higher latitudes and then experience seasonal affective disorder. Some people maybe move out of latitudes because they have seasonal affective disorder, so may kind of change the rates that we see in different areas. And also when you take people from like Iceland, for example, and track them and they move into Canada, which is still a high latitude, but lower than Iceland, they have less rates of seasonal affective disorder than people within Canada. So there's some genetic components here, but there's a lot of more questions than answers about the relationship just between latitude and the prevalence of seasonal affective disorder.
Right. So there may be something, genetic, and this also kind of gets into some of the like, how do we, this is a little bit about the vitamin D stuff, but not completely, but that like, I need sunscreen 24/7 all the time for me to not burn. And how we modulate the sun is something to do with our vitamin D kind of levels and then synthesis and da-da-da. We're not going to go into it because frankly, the research on vitamin D is super duper confusing to the point that the Society of like Endocrinology released a clinical guidelines update, and it was like literally in the paper there's like a narrative editorial on it that was like, hey guys, we could only like really give recommendations on 6 questions. We know you want answers to more, but we aren't sure yet functionally. And but I think with seasonal affective disorder, one of the things we haven't talked about, or we've alluded to a little bit before we even talk about treatments, is like one of the things you're saying, it sounds like, is in this moving and like a population from Iceland into Canada, that they were still doing better despite like compared to the population there. And that gets into actually some of the pop culture stuff with different concept, like I'm going to mispronounce this, but like the concept of like hygge, which is like HYGGE, or some of the things I think Catherine Mansfield has written really well about in Wintering. Oh, sorry, Catherine May. Catherine Mansfield's a different author. Catherine May wrote the book Wintering, which is just the question of like, how do we make sense of the season of winter and snow, and how do you prepare for it? And something that book talks a lot about, and then other books from different regions, especially the like Nordic, Scandinavian regions is like that they make sense of winter in a very different and more active way than a lot of places. And so I feel like there's a lot of ways in which it interacts of like our meaning and culture of how do we interact with it.
Yeah. So it's all three.
Yeah.
We come back to the biopsychosocial model. Someone in Iceland may have a different psychological relationship with winter, and they may be able to be more active when it's dark 23 hours a day or 20 hours a day. And then also they may have certain genes that allow them to maintain lower levels of melatonin throughout the day and feel more awake when they're not having that same level of stimulation.
Yeah. And they may be someone also like outside of where you are in the world. If you are someone who has a predisposition towards quote unquote regular non-seasonal depression, I think that does put you at higher risk for not necessarily seasonal depression, but like if you're someone who struggles with depression all year long, maybe the ability to tolerate these changes that induce somewhat of a lower mood or more fatigue. Or I think about people who have like chronic fatigue due to a variety of like chronic or autoimmune illnesses, like the predisposition towards depression in general, but also towards these things that make it hard to do other parts of like behavioral or lifestyle things that help with mental health more difficult, is also a part of how I talk to my patients about seasonal affective disorder. If it's something that they're worried about or have experienced before, in addition to the medication and therapy parts.
Yeah, it's the ability to have like a social support system or community despite changes in the environment are huge. So I'm still thinking about that person in Iceland who maybe their entire community is still active because they're just so used to having these like very dark days where somewhere in, I don't know, Vancouver, I shouldn't say Vancouver because Tessa's from Vancouver, or she's in British Columbia, right? Maybe they don't have the same like level of community because there's a lot of people who have moved from other areas. There's not the kind of like robust insular culture like you have in Iceland where like there's like 200,000 people in the entire country. So everything is like very tight knit and very like strong with their sense of culture despite these changes. So now that we kind of can look at these three pathways initially. So we have light can kind of stimulate our rods and cones to help with dopamine release, help with release of norepinephrine from the locus coeruleus as well. We have light mediating our circadian rhythms via melatonin, which is really controlling when we start to get ready to go to bed and when we start to feel like we're awake again. And then we know somewhere involved in here, serotonin has a role that it's playing. We don't want to make too many assumptions about whether it's too much serotonin, too little serotonin, but some amount of serotonin dysregulation is happening, likely postsynaptically. So when we treat it, the first line treatments are classically SSRIs and light. So if you look at kind of the range of SSRIs, the ones that are most effective are tricyclics, actually, and that's consistent with other types of depression. So amitriptyline is extremely effective. Compared
That's interesting, 'cause I feel like I've seen more of like first line being SSRI rather than.
Well, so first line still is SSRI, but if we go just off of effectiveness, a tricyclic will be most effective, but tricyclics also have the greatest risk of adverse effects compared to SSRIs. So if someone can achieve that benefit with Lexapro, and the reason why I bring up something like amitriptyline is because in addition to serotonin, also has norepinephrine and dopamine,
which makes sense.
Reuptake activity. So it kind of goes across all three. Whereas first line for us would be something like Lexapro, but
I think it was like Prozac and Lexapro were the ones that were the SSRIs most studied, which again I think probably lines up more importantly than the specific SSRI class is SSRIs are effective. There's a whole game to like what is like indicated or FDA approved, recommended in terms of these medications based on like funding to get studies to get it to be like, this is more effective or whatever for this specific indication. So yeah, I think SSRIs are first line, but then you're saying there may be added benefit in this kind of case with a TCA because of other modulation it's doing, which makes sense.
And I think it's hard to take into account because you're looking at like a quick on, quick off type of treatment. And so the other class of medicines that was studied the second generation antidepressants, so things like Wellbutrin,
Yep.
have also shown some efficacy. And
Shout
Wellbutrin
out
specifically, performed well in preventing the onset of seasonal affective disorder. So what the patients would do is they would start taking Wellbutrin in about October before you expect the onset of the symptoms. And then we would significantly see prevention of the seasonal affective disorder as we go through.
Right.
So
I'm quite pro the Wellbutrin in this case, just in terms of like what you classically think of as a seasonal depression symptoms and what Wellbutrin is really good at hitting versus an SSRI.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like even just like if I was a high school student, didn't know anything about science, I do know it's easier to stay on a bike than it is to get back on a bike once you've fallen off. So if something's going to keep me awake and keep me stimulated so that I don't develop this, it's going to be so much better to keep that momentum rather than waiting until I develop these symptoms and try to treat it with an SSRI.
Right.
And then the other treatment we have is light. So we have phototherapy,
Happy
and
lights.
it's measured. Yeah, it's measured in lux. So here, my question to you is: do you know what a lux is?
No, but I know it has to be at least 10,000, right?
10 million lux. Yeah, I think I have a light that's like 28,000 lux. It's pretty bright.
you guys
I
have
actually
the
got
sun
one of the
still.
lights.
This is
I know.
Preston's
I have
secrets.
this. I
This
can
is
go
Preston's
outside to see the
Vogue
sun.
Happy mental health secrets.
Well, so I got the light actually when I was on medicine, and I was
that
going
makes
to the
sense.
hospital at 5:30, and I'm coming home at 8. So I wasn't
that
seeing
makes
the
sense.
sun. So I would just try to blast myself with this 20,000 lux lamp while I was brushing my teeth. Because you're supposed to get to do it for 30 minutes.
Yeah,
so I'm like,
you have to do
okay,
it for that long every day.
I'm just gonna sit like planted on my mirror and just blast my face while I'm brushing my teeth. And
For 30 minutes? 30 minutes?
No,
That sounds from TikToks in my head. Do you know you have 30 minutes?
Yeah. No, well, so I would unplug it and then I would carry it with me to like breakfast, and I would plug it in, and I would just sit and eat my sad oatmeal with this light blasting me. And I felt more awake when I went to work. Like I did notice a difference with it.
You're like, I couldn't see, but I felt.
Yeah. Even
it has to be more. It's like, what is it? I forget what the stat is, but how many times more powerful it is than like a regular lamp. They are, I will say, not vibey and not aesthetic. Like it's like blue light. I'm more of a warm light person, so they're interesting in terms of the aesthetics, but I'll give it. It's kind of like a grow light for humans.
She would like, she would go like airplane ears and be like, "Why is this light on Preston?" She hated it. So we do find that these lights are effective though, and when compared to something like Lexapro, they actually perform similarly. With regard to seasonal affective disorder, and then there's actually
and you don't have to wear sunscreen while you have them, right? I don't know what your light is like. You're like, I'm actually in a tanning bed. We don't recommend tanning beds on this.
Yeah, I turn around and my whole back of my neck's white compared to the front.
You actually show up in the next episode wearing the teeny tiny tanning.
Yeah. So
although that's part of why there's vitamin D controversy is like the tanning bed industry in the 90s advocating for tanning beds as like treatment for part of seasonal affective and like low vitamin D.
I think vitamin D might deserve its own episode.
I agree.
Yeah.
Tune in for Patreon, behind the paywall, vitamin D controversy.
One for D2 and one for D3. So it has less side effects. It can be equally as effective, but it's hard, to be honest. It was kind of annoying to do this 30 minutes every day because it's so easy to just take a pill, and then I put pills in my backpack. Like I keep my meds in my backpack too. So if I forget them, I'm like, oh, I'll just take one at work right now. It's kind of hard to be like, hey guys in the workroom, like, let me whip out my.
Hey guys, I'm actually filming a POV med student TikTok, and then I have to do 60 minutes of my light therapy while I do push-ups. Is that chill?
So if it bothers you, just close your eyes. Don't worry about it. So there are some. The point is, there's some feasibility challenges with this light therapy. And it does have some benefit for non-seasonal depression as well. Though it's a little bit less robust. Yeah. Weirdly enough.
Interesting.
There's
your
been some
ring light
studies with
you use like secretly a happy light. So you're like, anytime I'm filming a TikTok, I'm actually in therapy right now.
I should do that. That'd be
Shark
smart.
Tank? Did you hear that? Like solving the mental health crisis of influencers.
It's like, yeah, remember you're happy while you're staring into the the lifeless abyss of like a social media parasocial chasm.
That we're
Don't think too
behind the
hard about it.
paywall.
So there's one more medication that I wanted to talk about, and it's called agomelatine.
Oh yeah, you had said this. I don't know anything about it, so I'm gonna let you teach this.
Yeah, I'm happy
Because
to.
why? Why do I not know anything about it?
You don't know anything about it because it's a European medication. So it was synthesized in the early 2000s, and it's an M1, M2 agonist. So it hits melatonin receptors. And it also has, I believe, 5-HT2A and 5-HT2C activity. So it affects serotonin receptors as well. It's not very selective for the SERT receptor. So not a lot of serotonin reuptake, but it hits these downstream serotonin receptors. The reason why it actually face planted in the US is when we did trials in 2011. Some people reported like elevated LFTs with it, and
yeah, we hate that.
The risk of like liver dysfunction was too much, and we pulled the plug on it. Further studies show that like Europe actually hasn't run into too many problems with elevated transaminases or LFTs in patients. And the last study I read on it, there was no significance between placebo and the agomelatine group. Nonetheless, I'm glazing agomelatine right now, but I think it could be worthwhile bringing back into US, and I'll tell you why. Yeah.
Docs. This mad.
So the idea is it's basically an antidepressant and a circadian rhythm stabilizer at the same time, because it has this serotonergic activity and also hits melatonin receptors. So in patients, you can take it at the same time every day, and it stabilizes. Imagine if Reimaging had SSRI effects. I think that's a good way to think about agomelatine.
Yeah.
So we find that even when we put it head to head against antidepressants, it's up there with like similar effectiveness to even amitriptyline and fluoxetine, but it's much better tolerated in general. So a lot of people do well with agomelatine consistently for these like small periods of time where they can both stabilize their circadian rhythms and also have some like more mild like mood uplifting benefits. So
maybe the people from Iceland in that study, they brought their European medication to Canada.
Yeah, maybe. We're just like watching them totally fly compared to us on agomelatine.
We're like, must be nice. Okay, so the overview of that is maybe helpful. A couple studies here in 2011 did not had some concerns in terms of side effects. That has not been as much of a concern in use in Europe. And the mystery goes on.
The ultimate point is that agomelatine is really effective for specifically seasonal affective disorder. So the thought is, if we stabilize both melatonin and serotonin receptors, we can get that extra benefit for what appears to be a separate but similar syndrome to non-seasonal depression. So that's our takeaway from it. And then if we look at new medications in the future, are we going to augment with melatonin agonists or melatonergic drugs?
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder when you're saying like, imagine this, and I think there's side effects to full on like different serotonergic modulation of an SSRI versus this medication you're describing. But like, is there a place for like a combination of like Reimaging and an SSRI to help with both?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. So I haven't actually looked into too much of augmenting with either melatonin or Reimaging while also giving an SSRI. But I think in theory, it's a great idea or a place to start looking. Yeah. I mean, I think the melatonin, we won't get into melatonin today, of like at like supplements with melatonin. We won't get into that. Let's tune in for a sleep episode someday. I think the thing we haven't talked about, which is near and dear to my heart, is therapy and behavioral activation for seasonal affective disorder, which is the other tried and true of the three in terms of efficacy. So there's a bunch of different ways you could approach this in terms of therapeutically. I don't know actually if there is. I know you had been thinking about like CBTI or cognitive behavioral therapy dash for insomnia, which is a specific protocol of someone struggling with insomnia, which can happen in seasonal affective disorder just with like the sleep-wake dysregulation in terms of insomnia happening. I really think a lot about behavioral activation and then some of the things we were talking about that are sort of the psychosocial determinants of
what someone's mental health experience would be. And so what that looks like is me asking about a lot of lifestyle things and trying to actively plan with my patients, both optimizing their meds, talking about the light therapy, but also in September being like, okay, what are the things that if I met you in the winter last year or years before, like how, like what would be different from what's right now? Like, what do you notice in terms of your social behaviors? What do you notice in terms of your change in exercise or movement, in terms of eating and appetite, sleep, and then like engagement with hobbies and work? I think especially like during post whatever COVID with like work from home, it's particularly difficult for a lot of folks because there's not a lot of impetus to leave your house and go out into the cold when it's dark when you get done with work at 4 p.m.
I think
it's
people
hard.
that
That makes sense.
spontaneously socialize when the weather's good are
Yeah.
very vulnerable to spontaneously not socializing when the weather's bad.
Right.
And people with social obligations that are built into their schedule may
Mhm.
do better. So, and I'm just speaking from personal experience. I
Yeah.
joined a soccer league and I have
Oh,
to go
yeah.
to my soccer game every Wednesday night.
Mhm.
So even as it gets dark and gets cold or all these things, I'm like, oh, darn it. I still have to go to
Yeah.
my soccer game where I have to interact with other human beings and exercise. So
Yep.
those people have built in like community prescribed to them. I think that's a great, so joining a league or something like that is a great way to behaviorally activate yourself and also create accountability.
Right. I think similar, yeah, well, we recently did the exercise episode and have talked about the many mental health benefits of that, which probably also apply in these cases too. So having something that gets you socializing, exercising, and doing the exercise being something you enjoy or find satisfying in some way, like you're describing, are 3 potent ingredients. I think this can also be a time where like engaging with a hobby, or for people who have like religious or spiritual communities or volunteering communities they belong to, like making a commitment to that or having a recurring routine with that, where like in the case of religious or volunteer or spiritual communities, again, there's this like really active involvement both with people, but also engagement with the values you have about belonging in community, that there's some positive social peer pressure, similar with your soccer league, that gets you out of your house and doesn't rely on the sense of like feeling it. Because I know for me, when it's like January and dark out, like I'm going to my like whatever volunteer extra like writing class thing I take. I'm not going to that because I'm like, I really feel like leaving my apartment and being cold in Boston. I'm like, I paid for this and my friend said that I was going to be there and I'm going to disappoint her. I don't.
Yeah. And like the fear of disappointing others may be what kicks you out the door and then you feel better when you do the thing.
Right.
I think
Right.
one thing you have to accept early on about going off of whether or not you feel like you want to do something is that you just need to anticipate that the feeling's never going to come and just start now.
Yeah.
Like I had to learn that with homework and exercise and maybe writing club too, podcasting.
I think also with this, like, is this marriage, and I think about this a lot in psychiatry, like of encouragement, or this part of like, I'm going to have feelings that are going to get in the way of the kind of life I want to lead. And sometimes that'll mean pushing to do it anyway. And self-compassion. I think something that is really hard for people in Western culture. And I think like a lot of people maybe who listen to us who are in healthcare or who just can like value being a productive or type A person in society is, again, this is anecdotal, but kind of a question I pose to my patients of, well, what if it was okay if this season was a little slower? Like, what if there's like a purpose to this sort of season of needing a little extra sleep? Or like, is all of this pathologic? Like, is all of this seasonal depression a mental illness that we need to like combat? And in a lot of cases it is, and we need to like, I do not want anyone to hear that as like, you're not suffering. But I do think some of it is this like hyper productivity culture that makes it so that like something is wrong and an alarm bell should signal if you're like, I actually am a little more introverted during the cold months, but I don't mind that.
Well, I think where it's really hard on people, especially in Western cultures, they punish themselves for emotions or desires.
Yeah,
like they don't have the desire to go out and then they feel guilt about that. And so I a lot of times in therapy will unpack people about unpack that with people and work through just not even punishing yourself for emotions, and kind of the analogy I use is like, imagine if you were in pain and then you punish yourself and you're like, I shouldn't be in pain, so now I feel guilty that I'm in pain. Like kind of to have that same relationship with your desires and your hesitation, your fears. Like those are all things that are telling you something. And it's so easy to just get mad at yourself for that. But having self-compassion for feeling tired. Like, of course, I will feel tired. I'm seeing the sun less. It's cold outside. So while on one hand, it's understandable that I would have these feelings, on the other hand, I want to go do these things that are going to make me feel better and activate me. And I shouldn't feel guilty about being tired.
Right. And there's something, I think, there are physiologic things about behavioral activation, exercise, community that make it easier, like make our moods change over time so that we do feel more like it. And that's a really important part of like the therapy approach is also, as we are learning more and more, neurobiological, like that there's neurobiological changes to kind of how like habitual.
I don't have anything smart to say about it, but like from a neurobiological perspective, but momentum is so powerful.
Yeah.
For me, it's just incredible. Even if I start a certain type of workout, like if I run, I want to keep running. Like I continuously want to keep doing my running. And recently I've been doing Pilates, and now I signed up for a Pilates class after this. I just want to keep hitting Pilates. Yeah. It's so challenging.
Are we agree?
It is unbelievably
what
challenging.
Are we doing? Do you know why it is more challenging for you besides that it's new to you? And why like it might be easier for women is because we actually have more type 1 fibers, which are endurance. And Pilates is primarily, there's like the center of balance stuff too, but Pilates is primarily like greater than 60 seconds repetition over minutes. And we have more type 1 fibers. And so we can like recycle that more. Whereas men on a whole have more type 2 or fast twitch fibers. Which, fun fact, we can cut that out. It's probably not that fun to anyone but me, but I think it's interesting. I feel like though that what you're saying, maybe you're not saying this, but like, I think a question that can be really fun, especially if you ask it before the season, before people are feeling down, is getting really creative with ourselves, with our friends, and with our patients around like, what are things that you can only do in winter? And this is what I write about a lot on TikTok.
I like that.
What if, I like to think of it as, the series I write on this on TikTok is called Winter Mysticism, which is the idea of like the positive invitation of solitude and community and like creativity. What? Why? Why are you laughing?
I'm just thinking about how I romanticize my solitude.
Yeah.
Only in winter can I be the lonely rider atop a hill in a cabin.
Well, no, I mean, yeah. So it's different for different folks. Again, this doesn't cure seasonal depression. But I think the idea for me, like one of the ones I've been thinking about is when it's the summer, especially here, as Preston knows, in New England, where he's like, we get it, you live by an ocean. But in the summer, I want to be outside. I want to be like doing the things I can't do all year. But in the winter, like there is time to like really learn how to cook some new recipes that I've wanted to. And it's okay to take that time because I don't really want to leave my house. It's okay to spend a long time reading books and drinking coffee.
Go mode. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be living that life.
For me, it's snowboarding. That's always been how I reframe winter. I'm like, oh, winter's coming. I'm like, but I can snowboard. Here's like something else I can do. And actually, I have a snowboarding trip planned. So it's community. Yeah, I'm regrouping with my friends and exercise and something you only do in winter. So that's my way of combating seasonal affective disorder.
I will say one thing that I think is a hoot, and I think it is evidence-based, but like one of the things in the papers from the primary people who started like kind of the research and coined seasonal affective disorder is like a recommendation in the summer to book a trip in the winter somewhere warm where you'll see the sun, which I think is neurobiologically sound, but I love that that's like that's a clinical recommendation. And it's true, but obviously it's not in reach for everyone.
Doctor's orders, I have to go to Mexico.
You know how
you can prescribe a gym membership to someone?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you imagine if you could prescribe like a vacation, like an all-inclusive vacation?
Disney cruise.
There's seasonal affective disorder. It's like, my insurance is going to cover this trip to Costa Rica. That's really funny.
So Preston and I are going to be doing a retreat. Just kidding.
Yeah. So
no.
I'll be right back. I'm going to be lobbying Congress to let me prescribe vacations to people.
Prescribing vacations.
That would be so therapeutic.
Just be what is the thing, the captain of like the Lido deck on cruises?
I've never been on a cruise. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, we'll talk more about cruises in upcoming
Okay. So our cruise episode's coming up next. Just kidding.
People have been wondering. People have been asking about when is the cruise episode going to come on?
I think that's all I had from my end. Any closing remarks, Margaret?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of different parts of wintering, and in the show notes, we'll put some of our references as well. I will include some links to the books I like about romanticizing winter, mountain clinically.
Yeah, that sounds great. So to the listeners, our third member in the room, thank you so much for listening. If you liked the show, if you didn't like the show, please submit your questions. We want to hear them. We just want you to be a part of the conversation, really. I see this as like three people in the room, me, Margaret, and the audience. And unfortunately, you guys don't get to talk during the show. So I want you to talk after the show, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you want to do that, you can come chat with us and the rest of the Human Content family on IG, on TikTok at Human Content Pods, or you can contact the team directly at howtobepatientpod.com. Thank you to all the listeners that left kind feedback and awesome feedback. I loved it, and I read all of it, and I didn't respond. And I know I didn't respond, but I'm busy, and I feel bad about it.
Celebrating
also, I
Honda
still really
days, you guys, okay?
If you want to see
Honda, if you want to sponsor.
Wake up. The Honda glazing has to stop.
It will never stop. My family's full of Honda glazers.
Full episodes are also available. Full episodes where you can be interrupted by Margaret are also available on my YouTube channel at It's Presro. Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret. Say your name.
Margaret Duncan.
Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Tracy Barnett. Our music is by Omer Benzvi. Check out our show notes and see references for the resources we discussed during the episode. To learn more about our program disclosure and ethics policy, submission verification, licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to our website, howtobepatientpod.com, or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a human content production.
You do eagle sound.
Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.